Hello, everyone, and welcome to Behind the Curtain with Broadway Creatives. My name is Katharine Quinn with And That's Showbiz, and I am so excited to be here today to talk to three incredibly talented creatives in current productions on Broadway. So please join me in welcoming Jason Ardizzone-West, the production designer of Redwood, Dan Moses Schreier, the sound designer of Floyd Collins, and last but not least, the musical director and conductor of Maybe Happy Ending, John Yoon. So the first question is for everyone. What drew you to your specific field in the world of theater, and what keeps you passionate staying working there?
I first was drawn to theater as like a 6-year-old kid. And I didn't know why, but I think now that I'm not a 6-year-old kid, looking back on it, it has something to do with just like the obvious stuff of like telling stories and helping humans kind of come together and, you know, process mortality and the human condition. But also for me, what I love is every project is this like mini start over of learning something entirely new about something that I didn't know before. And I just love that.
For folks watching who don't know what a production designer does, what does a production designer do? Like, what does that
It's a
title mean?
great question. I'll try to keep it short, but like I design spaces for storytelling. I guess that's the very short version, but it involves light and sound and voice and video and music and materials, and I really like complicating the definition of what I do and what anybody else does on the production. And so I think we're all kind of doing the same thing, um, which is helping humans to gather in spaces to share stories about humanity.
That was pretty concise. I liked that. Um, Thank you for humoring me. John or Dan, what brought you to the field that you are in?
I grew up in Detroit. My parents used to take us every summer to see theater in Stratford, Ontario. So that's where I fell in love with theater at the Stratford Festival. And I think the first play I ever saw was King Lear. So I think they threw me into the deep end. But I
Wow.
loved it. I completely loved how gory it was and how spectacular it was. And that's where I fell in love with the theater. I studied music composition in college, and when I graduated, my first job out of college was mixing uh, Pirates of Penzance in Central Park with Linda Ronstadt and Kevin Kline. And so I kind of fell into the sound world looking for a job after graduating. And from there, uh, uh, I've always divided my career between composing for the theater and doing sound design for the theater.
Similarly, sound design feels like a sort of nebulous field for people who might not be inside the theater. Is it making sure that things sound good in the orchestra as they do in the mezzanine? Is it an even distribution of sound and space, or is it the mix of music and sound effects? What all does sound design entail?
It's all of the above. I mean, it's really kind of I for different every show is different, so every show the definition of what the sound designer does is different. For a musical, it really is about collaborating with the composer and the director and collaborating with the music director. That's a very important part of sound design for me, and I hope John feels the same way. And that is to make sure that the orchestra sounds balanced, number one, and number two is making sure that the singers sound as wonderful as they are. And third is usually also creating a soundscape for the world of the play to live in. So it's really got three compartments are part of the sound design for a musical.
Wild, spinning plates. All right, John, music direction and conducting. What brought you there?
I feel less and less guilty the more I say this, but I was not drawn to theater. Sorry, everyone. What I was drawn to were music experiences, and I was curious about skill sets that would ultimately, you know, put things together for me that would allow me to succeed in this environment. But I did not seek out theater on its own. Before I keep going, Dan, I went to school at Western, and I'm a proud Western alum, which is down the street from Stratford, and I've done a few productions there. So Stratford is kind of near and dear to my heart. When I was growing up, I was always an average piano student. I was not good. My piano teacher just recently passed. She told me, do you remember me moving your fingers for you at the piano during your lessons? This is how uninterested I was at piano. It really took me a while to find the interest for myself. I was a very, very late bloomer. I did not take the craft seriously until most people have already started, forging a career. That was like mid 20s for me. When I was a teenager, what I was drawn to was performing in front of audiences. My first love was DJing and and playing records on turntables. And this was pre-Napster. So you were at the mercy of whatever was in your record bag at the time. And I remember playing to audiences, three, four, five, 600 people, and sort of uh, that collaboration between the audience and yourself, and understanding that what you were doing musically could have a deep effect on what was happening in the audience. And also DJing at the time was a kind of like a long form performance. They weren't 30-second snippets of what we have today. People were very much listening in 1, 2, 3 hour chunks. Um, so that interest and that adrenaline from being by yourself on the stage, and if something wrong happened, it was just you. All the faces turned to you, and you had egg on your face, and that was it. I think that parallel to theater is what draws me to music directing. There's music directing on Broadway is kind of like a 2 or 3 part endeavor. You have the production aspect to it. You're helping to build the show. You're communicating with adjacent departments, and you're building your book and figuring out the best way to do that. But once the show opens, there's also the live performative part to it, which is what I really love. Um, there's nowhere better than being in New York City on a Saturday night and that cue light turns off and you're starting the show. That for me feels just like DJing did 20 years ago, when it's just you, the orchestra, and you're doing the thing, and it's thrilling. So I think that parallel is what draws me to this, to what we're doing here.
Okay, next question is for Jason. So, Redwood obviously takes place in the Redwood Forest. That is a massive scale to comprehend, and we're fitting it in a Broadway theater and also transporting an audience to a real life place that has a very specific visual, aural, every possible kind of landscape. So, how did you even begin to wrap your brain around assembling with the other designers, like what that landscape was?
Partly by not thinking of it as needing to deliver the Redwood Forest, more about designing a psychological space, or a sort of brain space perception of the Redwood Forest, because really that's kind of where Redwood is set, is in the mind space of Jesse, Idina Menzel. And like, location wise, yes, we are often in the Redwood Forest, but then all of a sudden we'll sort of slam into a memory space where she'll be haunted for a few seconds by the memory of her son, and then we'll be back in the forest, or we'll sort of be experiencing her adrenaline rush of climbing the tree for the first time, and a kind of non-naturalistic um, experience of what it's like to be up high and to be connected to that type of living, breathing organism. Um, so yeah, I would say the whole creative team, and this was obviously led by Tina, who wrote and directed it, but she really came to us with the thought of, I don't want to have any fake foliage or try to like deliver a diorama version of the Redwood Forest, for those reasons I just said, but also it's not possible to do that inside a Broadway theater. It wouldn't be satisfying, and we would have failed miserably. So, focusing on this sort of point of view perception of a redwood forest and of being in a car and being in New York City and of feeling disconnected or connected to one's um, humanity or memories. That was really kind of the design challenge for me and for the rest of the team. It was much more abstract and kind of conceptual.
Dan, question for you. Floyd Collins, we're above the ground, we're in a cave, we're, you know, uh, in a beautiful historic theater, and you're having to show the passage of time uh, orally. How do you communicate that to an audience?
Well, I think the first job that I had to deal with was that the set was very abstract. So, so my job as a sound designer was to help the audience understand when they were underground and when they were above ground. I think that was one of the first tasks I had to help set up. And then not, and then the other technical thing is like, what does it sound like being in a cave? What does it mean to be in a cave? And Adam Gettle, who composed the score for it, has written some marvelous songs that takes advantage of the ideas of echoes in a cave. And so my job was to set up a system in the theater that we could bounce sound all the way around complete surround sound bouncing Floyd Collins' voice around the theater to establish that you're deep inside different size spaces, sometimes very large, sometimes very small. And the passage of time actually wasn't such a big part of what I was trying to, wasn't part of my storytelling. I mean, you're in a cave.
Yodeling. I've had it stuck in my head for, I guess I saw it about a week ago. So I've been yodeling, I would say on average once a day since then. And it really was such a visceral experience in the theater hearing the sound quite literally bounce. It's really, really, really cool. So yeah, I found it very engaging as an audience member.
I'm very happy.
Um, yeah, I loved it. Okay, John, your turn for the hot seat. So Maybe Happy Ending blends contemporary musical styles with a very unique emotional core. Has this score, working on this score, offered any new insights or significantly shifted your approach to musical direction or conducting in terms of interpretation, collaboration with the cast, or overall sonic storytelling? It's a big question.
So I think most music directors will agree that every score that's presented in front of you has its own set of unique challenges, and you're always putting a different kind of puzzle together. The challenges, which are great challenges for this show, we've we've received so much very nice positive feedback about the score, um, and also a lot of the sound design. One of the best compliments I think we've received, Dan, I think you'll probably appreciate this too. So people have said things along the lines of, I understand every lyric. I don't miss a single one. I hear every phrase, I hear every verse, I hear every chorus. I also hear the complete instrumentation, which is amazing and mortifying because that means there's no hiding uh, anywhere. All 10 chairs really are required to not only play at a high level, which is expected on Broadway, of course, but the amount of nuance and detail that goes into this, the magnifying glass is that much hotter now. It feels like we're operating at 100x all the time. So as a music director, especially in the beginning, I found myself um, asking the opinions of not just our creative music team, but going up to players specifically and saying, when you play the Glock this way, it sounds a certain way. where are you striking exactly that gives it this timbre that when someone else does it, it doesn't sound, it doesn't have as much ping or it's different. How do I communicate that? Or, it could be something like, I'm asking trumpet players about their mutes. I'm asking questions about soft mounts. I'm asking string players about, exactly what attack or approach it is to get certain colors because the detail really is that magnified. Um, it's been challenging, but it's so satisfying to know that your work is being heard at that level every night, and people are receiving it as well.
You're not all in the same space. We don't have a traditional pit on Maybe Happy Ending, right? So
Correct.
how many separate spaces across these three shows is anyone using a traditional pit? Does Floyd have a traditional pit?
Yes, we're using a traditional pit.
Okay, great. And Redwood's a no.
They're all in the same space, but they're not in the pit. They're off to the side.
And then John, can you sort of explain the setup for Maybe Happy?
The strings are all in one room together. Their mics are unbelievably hot, so much so that we've had to point out when to turn pages, when to you can put pencils down. If I do this, that's being picked up and it's in the house. So there are moments when we've asked, don't turn your page until measure so and so because it will get picked up in the house. So all the strings are in one room, the quartet plus bass. The horns are with me on the fourth floor. Um, so we're divided by four floors and our percussion, which is right next to my dressing room, if you can hear them. So it's three spaces: percussion, horns, myself, and strings.
And I feel like it's like a joint question almost with Jason. I don't know if you would interface with this at all, but like Jason is part of what you do, the sync of all these disparate departments working in unison so that like the show goes on.
On Redwood, and it's true on a lot of the concert stuff that I do, is that there's a lot of syncing between lights, video, sound, music, and the space, and who's driving who or who's triggering who is very often a big conversation. And for Redwood, there was one particular moment where we were trying to sync a sound effect with a lighting effect, or a lighting effect with a sound effect, and it kept switching of who was triggering what. Was it the music director? Was it the A1? Was it the lighting board? And I can't remember how it ended, but it was a big experiment because there was this little lag in the sync that we couldn't solve, having to do with technology that I don't understand, but I'm sure Dan and John do.
In my experience, when John has a situation where there are instrumentalists in different rooms, it's up to the sound designer to make everything coordinated. But to speak specifically about Floyd Collins, one of the joys of Floyd Collins is you see the musicians in the pit. We actually have the luxury to hear the music acoustically, which was part of both Adam Gettle's wish and Ted Sperling's wish as the music director of the show, that we use as much of the acoustic sound as possible. Um, so as a sound designer, that's a joy. Um, Coordinating different rooms and musicians in different rooms actually kinds of makes the composer and me sad. Not having everybody in the same room together. But one of the pleasures of Floyd Collins was to use the pit to hear. We have a 7-foot grand piano in the pit, which is very unusual. We have a string quartet, and we have a harmonica player, a guitar player, a bass player, and a percussionist. And they're all in the pit, and you hear them all acoustically. And it's more like the opera than contemporary electronica. But it has its place. Electronica and the division of musicians in different rooms, that has its place. There's nothing wrong with it. It's sometimes it's an aesthetic choice, sometimes it's a necessity. And we had the good fortune of Floyd Collins of being able to use the orchestra pit, and we actually hear the instruments acoustically. I mean, partially, not totally. But
That's
so
amazing.
they're different animals.
John, where's your baby grand? Or where's your full grand? Is it in your
Ah,
dressing room? Where is
boy.
it?
Okay, I'm going to tell a very short story. So when I was touring with a side story internationally, and there was a time when the the head carpenter would ask me weeks in advance, okay, we're going to be in Istanbul next week. These are the choices of piano that we can fly into the pit. And so every month or so, I had my options of, oh, they have a Fazioli, they have this, they have that. And that was just, I don't want to say I miss playing a real piano. I'll say it. There are pros and cons to all of it, and sometimes it's just a matter of logistics, and I understand that. And there are pros and cons to all of it, but there's certainly something nice about having a real instrument and not having to think, okay, I feel like I'm playing mezzo piano, but is it mezzo piano in the house? There's no real way of knowing inside of these things here. Um, but you know, each puzzle is different, so I get that.
Well, and each space is different. And I mean, so much of it, it feels like, is beholden to the beautiful historic theaters that we're a part of and, what the space, what the pits can even contain and, all of these things. So, um, we've touched on this a little already, but I'm curious, each of you, what departments you most frequently interface with. I mean, Jason, I guess it's like all design departments. But it's sort of, I'm curious about that relationship between, music director and sound. But like, also, are we interfacing with lighting? Are we interfacing with projection? Are we interfacing with, who else?
Well, when Dan was talking about the kind of bouncing sound, the echo space of the sound design for Floyd Collins, I was uh, reminded how I have been really collaborating with sound designers a lot lately in a way that one might not, necessarily think about as a set designer, um, kind of thinking about sound spatially, but it's a very clear collaborative overlap of um, space and sound interacting. And in for Redwood, the sort of obvious thing is trying to bring Stella to life. Stella is the name of our tree, this giant redwood tree, and she only exists interdepartmentally. There's a physical component to her that is like a tangible, tactile, sculptural object, but that in itself doesn't deliver the tree. There's a video component that's a kind of extension of it, but those two things don't do it entirely either. There's the lighting of dappled light coming through her canopy that we can't see, that's sort of beyond. Um, and then equally as important is this immersive sound design from Jonathan Deans, and beyond that, there's the way the actors are sort of interacting with all of these components, and all of that together sort of brings to life this one thing that you might simply described as a piece of scenery, but it's not. It's this holistic collective of uh, me, Anna Kim, Scott Zielinski, Jonathan Deans, Adina Menzel, well, Michael Parks, like everybody, and then Bandaloop, like the company that deals with the vertical choreography. Just hundreds of people really working together to create this one holistic experience. And that's, generally true of theater. It's a very collaborative field, obviously, but I don't know, Redwood was sort of even more, it was kind of the most collaborative experience I've had in a long time, of really every department having to truly interact and intersect.
Yeah, the collaborative nature of theaters for me is one of the best parts of doing this. You know, from music direction standpoint, we are often communicating with uh, choreographers, director, obviously, sound designers. Um, there was even a moment for this show where we were chatting a lot after tech with lighting designers, always it's about sort of not just being malleable, but trying to be able to translate what you need to tell your folks that will work well with what you've just been asked of from other departments. A lot of times when you're working with the choreographer, measure 53 doesn't mean anything to them. Measure 53 is jump for joy, or it's the PK section. It means something totally different. And so we're constantly jotting what they speak so that when we translate that information in tech, which is often, as everybody here knows, can be a stressful time, that we can get to that spot very quickly. And then, sometimes music team will also throw out some terms that maybe is not necessarily in, stage management vocabulary, but I know that they'll say, "Oh, this is the part where we do the soup." The soup is now a term that we use at the end of Jenny, which is just when everyone's just feeling, a la Buddy Rich, like we just understand that as the soup now, and everyone has now an understanding of what that moment means. And you know, it's always about trying to figure out the best way and understanding that what you have to say or what your idea may not make the most sense to people. And if that's the case, understanding that it's okay to scrap that right then and there and move on to the next thing and figure out what the best way is to put the thing together. Um, but yeah, sound designers are friends for the most part.
That's the perfect segue. What about you, Dan?
Well, the challenge specific to Floyd Collins meant my collaborations were closest with the music director, the composer, and in this case, our lead actor, Jeremy Jordan. And that had to do with how these echoes worked in the theater. And the echoes are scored, so they're timed, and the echoes have to sync up with the music. And so my collaboration with Ted Sperling and Adam Gettle, the composer, was to make sure that the echoes were working the way that they wanted them to sound, but they always had to be in sync with the music. And wherever the echoes happened, sometimes the music changed the tempo. So the echoes also had to change tempo. So part of the collaboration was making this machine that I created so that the echoes would work and could shift very easily tempo-wise, so they always stayed in sync with the music, which was an enormous challenge. And also to make
I,
that work, I installed 170 speakers into the theater to make the theater sound like a cave. So there are a lot of speakers in the theater.
that's incredible. I have a probably naive question. The echoes are pre-recorded, correct? They're not like a loop. No, they're not. They are. Are they?
The echoes are live.
Wow. That's
You are hearing
wild.
Jeremy Jordan's voice bounce around the room live.
That is crazy.
That's
That's
my
so
job.
cool.
Crazy.
You're like,
What a
congrats.
crazy job.
Yeah, that's wow, that's amazing. Um, John, the coup de théâtre in Maybe Happy Ending, without giving away spoilers, does involve musicians taking a little trip on stage. What was it like it was it Michael Arden's job to explain to the musicians, "Hi, this is a fun part of your job now." Like what is that process? And then also what is the timing of getting them in place and having them exit, the room that they're playing and making sure they're in the right place? Like how did that work?
Right. So that you're right. That is a massive part of the show. That is, I don't want to say too much about it, but I will say that uh, you know, to achieve that moment, it wasn't just one try. We had many different attempts. Can we put them here? When can they leave? How can we cover them once they've gone? How do we get them back? When will they have time to change? Do they need to have a second set of instruments to pick up so they don't have to carry their own? Like the problem solving for that was a big one. It was a good payoff, but it did require a lot of conversation. We were experimenting with maybe stands with white notes on black paper. It was crazy. but it was so much fun trying to figure out like, okay, we can't, this is a really great idea. We just need to figure out how to make this work for everybody, not just, not just the people who played every night, but the people who come in maybe once a week. Like, how can we make this okay for everybody and, not have anybody fall. Anyways, I don't want to say too much, but it was fun to put that together.
Yeah, I cannot imagine being a sub and just jumping in and being like, okie dokie, here we go. It's just crazy. It's crazy, but really fun. Jason, we talked about this, like, or you alluded to it a little bit earlier, but the jump between Redwood Forest, which you've said is, a point of view of Jessie's mind anyway, but then also jumping back in her memory and how this is the silliest way I can think to describe this, so please forgive me. But I'm like, is it a Pinterest mood board? Like, how do you, like, where in one's brain does one conjure like what the aesthetic difference is between the two of those, and how do you communicate that to the audience?
So part of the inspiration for what the set looks like physically came from a story that one of the characters, Becca, tells in Redwood. She's telling Jesse about the creation myth called Tikkun Olam, which describes God sending light in vessels to the earth, and the light being too strong, and it breaks the vessels, and the light gets scattered across the universe. And it's therefore humans' purpose. God creates humans in order to gather all those lost bits of light and try to put them back together, to try to repair this broken vessel, which of course is a beautiful metaphor for a lot of things, specifically for this healing process that Adina's character is trying to go through. Um, and it it for me became a real kind of starting point for what the space of the storytelling might look like. And so the 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 physical setup is inspired by a kind of empty, broken vessel whose purpose is to gather light and gather people. Um, and so the space is round and sort of fragmented, happens to be made out of LED screens. Um, but the center of it, the kind of heart of it, is this very tangible tree named Stella. And she kind of rotates in and out of being in the middle or being part of this broken, cracked surround. Um, and that that very simple kind of radial circular ground plan, um, which, if you look closely, looks like the cross section of a tree with the rings of a tree, or it also looks like a kind of radial root structure, of what might be underground below the tree. It also is inspired by a photograph of the inside of my eyeball that my eye doctor gave me once, that shows this radial, like, branching structure of the blood vessel in the back of my eye, and just this kind of universal, like, organizational plan is what creates the design for Redwood, which also includes the curvature of the balcony and the rows of seats of people watching the show. So that was like the starting point. And so these the finding the visual language for being in kind of tangible space versus memory space was inspired by that idea of light, of like gathering shards of light. And so there's this um, visual language that Hannah and I and Tina all kind of came up with together, that had to do with just very like abstract lines of light and shards of light that became a kind of um, you know hint or metaphor at, oh, we're now entering memory space or psychological space, and then the kind of, we're just in the forest, are much more panoramic, kind of more complete. So it came out of the you know conception of the piece, that language.
Okay, Dan, going back to you, you talked about how you have the luxury of the pit, how it is a largely acoustic sound coming from the pit, but you're also dealing with a lot of string instruments and bluegrass sounds. And I would imagine that a harmonica carries more than, for instance, a guitar. What is the what is the challenge of balancing all of the sounds that are needed for a bluegrass sound within a Broadway theater? Well, Lincoln Center.
That is Broadway theater.
Yes, and
Uh, it took the balancing of the orchestra took a lot of work, and I worked closely with our orchestrator Bruce Coughlin, who I've known for many years, and to get this. I mean, the harmonica is actually quite a small sound, and compared to a 7 foot Steinway Grand, which has a large sound. So to get those instruments balanced in a space as large as the Vivian Beaumont, which is not a proscenium house, it's a thrust three-quarters house, there were enormous challenges balancing the orchestra and I had everything delivered smoothly throughout the entire theater, extreme house right, extreme house left, and in the balcony, and that took a lot of time. But because Bruce's orchestrations are so brilliant, and he also orchestrated the original production. Um, it was a great joy to get to work with him and to get to work on these sounds. I mean, he has crotales and the vibraphones and blending with the harmonics and the strings. So like that kind of coloristic thing, as a sound designer to get a chance to work and hear and balance those things, it's a real joy. So it was a lot of work, but at the same time, it was part of the fun of the job.
John, Maybe Happy Ending is this beautiful combination of, the utmost sincerity and earnestness, but told through the lens of robots. So it's both connection and, sort of technology and the search for meaning. From your perspective, helping shape the musical landscape, what specific elements in the score and its integration with the story do you believe contribute to the emotional connection and like the resonance that it seems to be finding with our audiences?
I can't I can't give Will Aronson, our composer, enough praise here. There's For some reason my algorithm on YouTube will bring me down some, it'll show movie scores before they've added underscoring. The same scene, famous scenes that before and they're so wildly different. Most pianists have 50 go-to songs that they can show up at a party. They can just rattle them off, get the party started. Same, I do. I have a bunch of Motown songs, Billy Joel, Beatles, Killers. I know how to make that happen. Bill has 50 go-to movie scores that he can play from memory. And this happened one time. We were at a party. It was a Maybe Happy Ending party. A bunch of us are, Darren's a big karaoke guy. We're all singing and dancing and we're doing the things. But Will can play full movie transcriptions from memory. He's a huge John Williams fan. So I think when you have that as your, part of your musical backdrop, I think his is, being able to tie scenes together and understanding how he can shape certain emotions. It it's just it's incredible. I've heard from people after a cast album came out that they're listening to our underscoring scenes. There's no words. I just did an interview last week of a podcast who said sometimes I just listen to the album for the songs that aren't songs. They're just the scenes that go in between there because I remember how those scenes made me feel in the theater, and that scoring brings me back to that feeling, which is, I think, one of the most amazing compliments that you can give to a composer. I have the privilege of getting to conduct the show every night, and we've done like 200 performances or something like that, but I'm playing from a full score, so I see the way he's layered certain things, or he's doubling viola with trombone, and every night I'm just sort of like, wow, you clever, yeah, wow, that's it's just every day I'm just sort of in awe, and sometimes when I go out into the house to note the show, every now and then I'll just sit in the string room, which is hot. I don't make any noises. I just sit there and just listening to the string writing, I've often think like this could be an album. Like just these five players doing the thing without anyone else. This could be a separate acoustic album on Decca. I don't know. So, it's um it's nice to be part of this and work with Will, who has obviously a very innate understanding of how to tie in our what we're watching and perceiving at the time, and what to write under it to kind of enhance these emotions that are bubbling and brewing. Anyways, he's, so brilliant, but he won't listen to my compliments, but it's fine.
And he orchestrated as well, yeah.
He he wrote the book, he orchestrated, he wrote the songs. I
With you
flabbergasted
with
at
Hugh Park.
with Hugh Park, the two of them. I just imagine them sitting in a cafe together, bickering over. They're just a wonderful pair to watch them, work and just exist. But yeah, they anytime the two of them are together, they're like, yeah, it's like this amazing partnership. They're like a Penn and Teller situation. They just work so great together.
Absolutely. All right, final question, everyone. And this is sort of a all skate, so anyone can jump in and begin. But what is one thing that you'd like audiences to take away from your shows, whether it is the show overall or something specific to your work on the show?
Redwood is a musical about grief and sort of over or working through grief. It's not your typical musical, and there's a real kind of generosity to it, I think, that um, kind of um, embraces the audience and offers them to kind of come into this very private, human, vulnerable process, um, which I think is really what theater tries to do in general. But sometimes it's through comedy, and sometimes it's through spectacle, um, and sometimes it's through this very kind of sincere, unapologetic, uh, invitation to to connect together. Um, and so I I hope that is what people experience, a kind of presence, um, a presence of like just really just being, acknowledging this moment of time that we're all sharing this space together and feeling a real humanity, before kind of getting spit back out into the slash and burn of New York and America and the world. It's a little gift, I think.
Yeah, theater's a respite. John, you want to go next?
When you come into the Belasco and you take this in for the first time, um, it's without saying too much, it's going to inevitably make you think about your relationships under the I don't know how to say this. It's oh man. I I get emotional talking about this sometimes because the show is inevitably about the lifespan of these two robots, and you can't help but think about every relationship you've had, with your family members, your children. I'm a new dad, uh, romantic relationships, and it's going to put things in a scope that you probably weren't expecting to happen. Um, don't read too much about it before you go, but once you're there, um, allow your mind to go there and embrace the 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 questions it's going to have you asking both during and afterwards. I think a great thing that I've heard people say, friends, colleagues, uh, theater fans. Someone once said to me, it's 5, 6 days after, and I'm still thinking about the show. not necessarily specific scenes or songs, but just sort of um, the the mind frame it's kind of put me in. So don't read too much about it. Come and enjoy it, and kind of come in with a kind of with an open mind, which I'm sure most people are doing anyways.
All right, Dan. Last but not least.
Okay. Uh, one of the things that makes Floyd Collins such a special evening in the theater is that it's truly collaborative in all the art forms to create this evening of the theater. The music is special, the lyrics are special, the direction, Tina's direction is special. The scenery, the way the scenery works with the lights, works with the costumes, works with the sound, and then ultimately the way it all works with the actors, it really comes all together for a wonderfully collaborative experience of what theater and what the power of theater can be in the theater. And it's one of the things that I've taken away from the experience myself. It's been really a wonderful thing.
Love it. What a perfect note to take us out on. That is all the time that we have for today. Thank you so much, Jason, Dan, and John, for being here with us to discuss your amazing work. And thank you to Impact 24 PR and all of you watching here on the internet. Thank you all so much.
Thank you
Good
for
chatting
asking
with
such
you
great
guys.
questions.
Thank you.